Max, what do you think of things like damage downs in Mythic Plus instead of damage being the only punishment for failing a mechanic? We've talked about this before on the podcast. I'm a fan. I think damage players would initially be really annoyed by the damage downs, and then I think they'd acknowledge the fact that they just have to not get hit by stuff as much, and then I think people would be way better at mechanics. I think it's an excellent idea. Like, hard send. I think it's a great idea. You make things less lethal in Mythic Plus, and you just give them damage downs instead, and you will see the behavior of DPS change before your very eyes. What is a damage down? When you get hit by something on the ground, it doesn't shit on your character and kill you. It makes you do less damage for a few seconds. It's like a debuff. It's like a stacking debuff. Because DPS players are just like, fucking heal me, you know? They're just like, this healer can heal me. But bro, getting hit by stuff meant they did less damage. Here's my thought. All the people, not all that everyone cares about, but what a lot of people care about is just doing the highest overall at the end of the dungeon. Sometimes at the sacrifice of other people, or making mistakes. But now, if they put damage downs in the game, having the highest damage at the end of the dungeon would still be your best players, but it would also be people who like played well and didn't get hit by things, which is what you should do to be a properly good player anyway. So it would just enforce good decision making. Like right now, to be top of the meter, sometimes you greed, and that's bad. You don't want to greed, right? It kind of affects everyone around you because you're a little greedy boy. But like, you're only greedy because you want to do damage. But if the correct way to do damage was to not get hit by stuff as much, like, I'm not saying literally every point of damage is a damage down, like very obvious avoidable damage that people often sit through and make their healer heal them through, right? It would make people understand what mechanics they should and shouldn't be hit by more, right? I think there's actually so many positives. Here's what I think would happen. If they ever enabled that, it would be all people complained about for a week, and then after like a month, it'd be like, wait, this is actually like way better. That's what I think. Would that inherently nerf classes that have a harder time dodging spells with less mobility? I mean, if you do it right, no, right? You shouldn't apply damage downs to a spell you have to dodge that requires movement speed to get out of. I would say. This also goes against the Trinity. They'll never do that. Well, it doesn't really go against the Trinity because like you can still have stuff be punishing to your health bar, but it also makes things less punishing to your health bar, which is something that healers kind of want now. You want things to be less one-shotty, right? Well, if stuff just by default did like less damage but had other punishments that would, you know, there's a trade-off that makes. I'm not saying I don't have it fully worked out in my head. I just think it's a concept that could work for sure. They do it in Final Fantasy. They do it in Final Fantasy. That wouldn't necessarily be the reason you would do it in WoW, because there's ways that it could be bad as well. But yeah, I mean, I think it works. Wouldn't be a seamless transition though. Definitely be a lot of like learning curve. Because people just don't read, right? People just like play the game expected to be the same. A perfect example of this is Augmentation Evoker. Like Augmentation Evoker was the most talked about thing for so long, right? When it got announced for weeks and weeks and weeks, people were just like, oh my God, this is the only thing to talk about. How is it going to be? And everyone understood everything about it and what they were going to expect, how good it was going to be, whatever. And then the patch came out, and none of that mattered because you realize that if you are someone who's paying attention to discourse surrounding like public test realm stuff, you are a part of the like 5% of like the information economy that's actually spread. Like people weren't inviting AUGs to groups in the first week because on details they were doing like negative damage. Even though they were actually topping damage, details didn't show them topping damage because it doesn't do that, and people didn't understand it was a support class, and they were like, evoker bad, and they just stopped dividing all evokers because no one pays attention to information. Right? So if they did damage downs, we'd be talking about it for a while as this crazy thing, and even if it was determined that it was good, people would still log in and hate it because they don't know why they're doing 0 damage. They'd post to Reddit, am I bugged? AUG was a mistake and still is. I could see that. I think I know why they did it, but if you were to go back in time and they just never make AUG, I think definitely people who play the game at a high level maybe are actually, I don't know. There's a lot of people who like playing AUG. I probably don't think it's a mistake, but I don't think it was implemented necessarily really well. There's a lot of people who I know very strongly believe that it's a mistake though, and I definitely understand that. But I think that's from like I think usually that's a pretty narrow perspective of the game. Not saying that you saying that makes you have a narrow perspective, but like I know a lot of people like me and like a lot of you that do have a perspective that is basically just the way they see the game. How it's hard to not, right? You do that. But I think that it was very, very good for a lot of the people you'd never hear from in Twitch chat or Twitter. AUG's biggest mistake is that it was the only support class. See, I've never really understood that take because like people were mad that it was there at all. Like they were mad that it was taking their dungeon spot for so many years. AUG is just the only class you can play in dungeons now. It requires one support because it's so good. And they're like, well, it's not AUG's fault. There should just be more of them. It's like, really, the reason you're mad is that spot is gone for you. So, like, whether it was a support paladin or a support shaman or whatever, like, that spot's still gone. I feel like most of it was just that, I don't know, there was some hate because they were always in Mythic Plus groups. There was some hate because dev players had to spec swap to it against their will. That made sense. They took multiple raid spots up. But like if it was other classes doing that, I still think a lot of this, all those things are still true. One real thing is it makes damage meters that you see in game no longer important. Like if you just see yourself owning or not owning on a fight, you just don't even know if it's because someone above you got ogged or you didn't or did, or, you know, it's just like, you don't need to be like a fully self-absorbed damage only person to like want to constantly track your performance in a game. There's a healthy amount of caring about performing well in a game that is not purely defined as like being a damage, like being purely damage motivated, right? I think it ruined a lot of that. Nah, I check that shit in logs to make sure I'm actually owning. Well, unfortunately, logs have also never been correct with augmentation. Actually, they were for a very short amount of time years ago.